Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to dive into this one with you because today we're unpacking a fundamental aspect of human behavior. We're talking about how we actually go about changing our lives, our work, and the world around us. Think about it. We spend so much time and energy trying to figure out how to make things better. But what if I told you we've been completely overlooking half of our options? Today, we are exploring some truly brilliant concepts from Leidy Klotz's research on the Untapped Science of Less. We're going to break down why our brains are quite literally wired against subtraction, and how mastering this one concept can completely transform our lives. So just think about your own life for a quick second. Do you feel busier today than you were, say, 3 years ago? When you sit down to make your New Year's resolutions, or even just setting your goals for the week, do they usually start with, I should do more of, or I should do less of? If you're like almost everyone else on the planet, you definitely have more stuff than you used to. You spend more time acquiring information, and your very first instinct when fixing a problem is to add a new rule, build a new habit, or tack a brand new task onto your already overloaded plate. We have this universal, almost unavoidable instinct to add. But why exactly is that? Okay, let's dive into this. Because the realization of this crazy bias actually started for researcher Leidy Klotz with something as simple as a Lego bridge. He and his 3-year-old son Ezra were hanging out building a bridge out of Legos. But the support towers they built were different heights, meaning the bridge wouldn't sit flat. Now, Leidy is an adult, right? And not just any adult, he's a trained civil engineer. So he immediately reached behind him to grab an extra block to add to the shorter tower. That was his ingrained adult instinct. But as he turned back around, little toddler Ezra had already solved the problem. And how did he do it? Ezra simply removed a block from the taller tower. It was faster, it was way more efficient, and it created a perfectly level bridge.
Which brings us to Section 1, the subtraction blind spot, and exactly why we completely overlook taking things away. That single passing Lego moment sparked a massive scientific investigation. Klotz and a whole team of researchers wanted to know, was this just a quirky thing that happened with a kid and his toy blocks, or do adults systematically have a blind spot for subtraction? To test this out, entirely removed from the context of physical effort or childhood toys, they designed what they called Andy's Grid. The brilliance of this abstract experiment is in its simplicity. They gave participants a straightforward task. Make the patterns on the left and the right sides perfectly symmetrical and do it using the fewest possible changes. You could either click to add shaded blocks or click to remove shaded blocks. Now, the absolute simplest, most efficient solution is right there. Just remove 4 blocks from the right side. But check out these staggering results. Even in a completely abstract task on a computer screen, where adding a block and removing a block take the exact same amount of physical effort, literally just the click of a mouse. 80% of people chose to add blocks. Only 20% of people took the most efficient route and actually subtracted. It's wild, right? It proves that our bias toward adding isn't just about the physical world. It is deeply, fundamentally embedded in human cognition. When we're tasked with improving something, we literally fail to even think of subtraction as a viable option. Moving into Section 2, the deep roots of more, and why we default to adding.
So we really have to ask the big question here. Why are our brains so heavily hardwired to overlook doing less? Why do we default to adding, even when we know it makes our lives more complicated and our solutions less elegant? Well, let's break down those deep roots. First up, we've got biology. Our ancient ancestors survived by acquiring food and resources. We also have this deep biological drive to show competence to potential mates. And let's be honest, it's a lot easier to prove you did something amazing by showing off a massive thing you built, rather than showing a clean, empty space where you strategically removed something. Then there's our culture. Since the actual dawn of civilization, humans have left their mark by adding to the landscape. We're talking building temples, pyramids, and giant monuments. And finally, we are totally trapped in a modern economic system of what the research cleverly calls morality. Since the mid-20th century, we've basically equated success with GDP growth, getting more square footage in our homes, and working longer hours. Our entire society just naturally cheers for addition.
And this biological and cultural programming leads us directly into what we can call the busy trap. You know that feeling of never having enough hours in the day? We suffer from a modern time famine largely because subtraction requires an extra cognitive step. See, when we solve a problem by adding, we usually hit a point of good enough, and our brain just stops right there. It is the path of least resistance. To actually subtract, you have to actively push past that initial instinct, which requires extra mental bandwidth that, frankly, exhausted, busy people just do not have. So we stay busy, and we just keep adding to the pile.
That brings us to Section 3. The power of subtraction, and how we reveal the beauty underneath. So What actually happens when we actively fight our biology and our culture and harness this untapped power of taking things away? When we start revealing the beauty underneath all the clutter, the results are honestly nothing short of extraordinary. Let me walk you through an incredible real-world example, the story of the Embarcadero Freeway in San Francisco. Back in the 1950s, the city built this massive, double-decker concrete highway that completely blocked off the city's beautiful waterfront. For decades, a visionary local leader named Sue Berman fought tooth and nail to have it removed, but voters flatly rejected the idea over and over. They were terrified of change and the traffic it might cause. It wasn't until the devastating Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989 heavily damaged the freeway that the city's hand was finally forced. In 1991, they finally tore it down, literally subtracting millions of tons of concrete from the landscape.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer magic of subtraction. Remember all those terrifying predictions of complete traffic gridlock and an economic nightmare? Yeah, none of it happened. Instead, traffic dispersed naturally into the surrounding city grid. The waterfront blossomed into this incredible space. Over the next decade, there was a 50% increase in housing and a 15% increase in jobs in that area. By removing a monstrous piece of infrastructure, the city didn't lose anything. They gained a vibrant, world-class waterfront.
But it's absolutely crucial to realize that subtraction works everywhere, not just in massive urban planning projects. Look at these amazing micro-stories from the research. Leo Robinson was a dock worker who led a movement to refuse unloading South African cargo. He literally subtracted financial support and logistics, which helped spark the international divestment that contributed to bringing down apartheid. Then you have Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom, who solved deeply complex economic problems by subtracting flawed assumptions from the famous tragedy of the commons theory. And on a completely different note, Ryan McFarlane revolutionized how kids learn to ride bikes by simply taking the pedals and training wheels off, creating the incredibly popular Strider balance bike. It's like a universal cheat code for problem solving.
All right, let's jump to Section 4, the Less List Toolkit. These are highly actionable steps for everyday life.
Knowing that subtraction is powerful is great in theory, but how do we actually overcome our hardwired instincts to use it in our day-to-day routines? We really need a framework that anyone feeling totally overwhelmed can use to simplify their work and their lives. Now, before we get to the specific steps, it helps to visualize the journey. Imagine starting with what we'd call lazy less. Like a bike with no pedals and no training wheels, you just fall over because it's not well thought out. As you put in effort to fix a problem, you usually add things until you reach a peak of good enough, what scientists actually call being satisfied. But to reach true effective less, you have to expend even more cognitive effort. It takes real work to push past our mental stopping points, to deliberately edit, prune, and refine something down to its absolute perfect essence.
So here are the 4 highly actionable steps of the Less List. Step 1. Invert. Before you ask, what can I add to fix this, explicitly force yourself to ask, what can I remove? Step 2. Subtract first. Make taking away your absolute baseline. Think of the game Jenga, where the fundamental rule forces you to remove a block before you can ever add one to the top. Step 3. Persist. Don't stop at good enough. You've got to push through that initial mental barrier until the less becomes noticeably impactful. And step 4. Reuse. Just like taking the center out of a donut gives you a totally new, awesome product, donut holes. Find ways to repurpose the things you subtract.
Now, I have to warn you, a massive hurdle to doing this successfully, especially when you're working with other people, is something called loss aversion. Humans absolutely hate losing things more than we enjoy gaining things. If you pitch a subtractive idea using negative framing, using words like losing, taking away, or cutting back, people will fight you tooth and nail. They will cling to the status quo, just like those voters in San Francisco originally did with the freeway. But if you use positive inversion, the whole dynamic changes. You aren't taking away, you are revealing, you're cleaning, you're carving, and you're maximizing potential.
Let me show you how brilliant designers mask subtraction to get buy-in. Take Kate Orff, a visionary landscape architect. She won a massive competition to transform downtown Lexington, Kentucky, and she did it primarily by removing old infrastructure to uncover an underground creek. But notice the verbs she used on her architectural drawings to sell the idea. Reveal, clean, carve, connect. She didn't use the words subtract or destroy even once. She successfully pitched the massive removal of concrete by using positive action words, making subtraction feel like an incredible, exciting upgrade rather than a loss.
Which brings us to our final section, systems, legacy, and mastering the art of less.
When we master this toolkit, when we truly learn to push past good enough, invert our framing, and intentionally subtract, we can apply it to much more than just our overflowing email inboxes or our cluttered closets. Mastering the art of less is absolutely vital for humanity's future on a grand scale. Think about the massive global systems we navigate today. To stave off environmental devastation, the research argues we can't just keep adding green technologies, we must actively subtract carbon emissions from our climate comments. When looking at systemic racism, the source material points out that it's crucially about actively removing the historical structural barriers and redlining that exploit communities, rather than just adding new programs. And in our daily digital lives, we are all drowning in information overload. We have to shift from just mindlessly collecting information to attaining actual wisdom, and we do that by fiercely filtering, editing, and subtracting the noise. We have to remove the harmful distortions built into our systems.
So the most crucial point of all this is actually summarized perfectly by an insight that is literally thousands of years old. It comes from the ancient philosopher Lao Tzu, who said, "To attain knowledge, add things every day. To attain wisdom, subtract things every day." In our modern, relentlessly cluttered, fast-paced world, true wisdom doesn't come from piling more onto your plate. It comes from the divine, deliberate act of editing, stripping things down, and revealing the brilliant essence underneath.
I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge today. Take a good hard look at your life, your calendar, or maybe a big project you're struggling with at work right now. Instead of writing yet another massive to-do list, what will you subtract today? I highly recommend you try building your very own stop doing list. Actively look for that invisible option of taking things away. You have this incredibly powerful, untapped science at your fingertips now. Go out there and experience the profound delight of less. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.